Today's world of technology is completely dominated by machines and their behavior is controlled by the software powering it. So, how do we know that the machines will behave exactly the way we want them to every time? Now, the answer to all these questions lie in software testing. Hi everyone, this is Shantini from Edureka, and today we are going to have a look at the different types of software testing. So, let's begin with today's agenda. So first we will see what is software testing, and then we will have a look at why we need testing. Next up, we will move on and have a look at the software testing life cycle. And finally, we will discuss all the types of testing such as functional testing, non-functional testing, and all the other various testings under them. So let's begin. Now, the last decade has seen an overwhelming evolution of the software testing industry, giving way to greener pastures. Now, it is important to ensure an effective performance of software application, and software testing is required to ensure that the application runs without any failures. Now, software testing is basically a process of evaluating the functionality of a software application to find any software bugs. It basically checks whether the developed software meets the specified requirements and identifies any defect in the software in order to produce a quality product. Now let's move on and have a look at why do we need testing. So the importance of software testing is imperative. Now a lot of times the process is skipped, therefore the product and business might suffer. Now to understand the importance of testing, let's have a look at some of the key points that explains why our product should undergo it. The first one is that software testing saves money. So, testing has many benefits, and one of the most important ones is cost effectiveness. Now, having testing in your project can save money in the long run. Software development consists of many stages, and if bugs are caught in the earlier stages, it costs much less to fix them. That is exactly why it's important to get testing done as soon as possible. Now, getting the testers or QAs who are technically educated and experienced for a software project is just like an investment, and your project will benefit budget wise. Now, next up is another important point, that is security. This is probably the most sensitive and yet most vulnerable part. Now, there have been many situations where user information has been stolen or hackers have got into it and used it for their benefit. Now, that is the reason people are looking for trusted products that they can rely on. Now, as a user of many products and apps, I'm always looking for products that I would give my information to with confidence and know that it will be safe. So, our personal information and what we do with it should stay as private as possible, especially when using services where it is a vulnerability to us, such as banking information, security details, etc. Next up is the product quality. Now, in order to make your product vision come to life, it has to work as planned. So, the following product requirements is imperative to an extent because it helps you get the wanted end results. So, the products always serve users in some ways, so it's very important that it brings the value it promises. Hence, it should work properly to ensure great customer experience. Now, development of an app, for example, has many processes included, and testing gets a glimpse of every bit. Now, the final one is customer satisfaction. Now, the ultimate goal for a product owner is to give the best customer satisfaction. Now, reasons why apps and software should be tested is to bring the best user experience possible. Now, being the best product in this saturated market will help you gain trustworthy clients, which will have great long-term effects. Now, once users will have amazing customer experience, they will without a doubt tell their friends, and word to mouth will make it advertise itself. But this works both ways. Now, these were just very few of the reasons why we need testing. Now, let's move on and have a look at the software testing life cycle. So, the software testing life cycle basically identifies what test activities to carry out and when to accomplish those test activities. And there are 6 different phases in the software testing life cycle. So, the first one is the requirement analysis. Then we have test planning, test case development, environment setup, test execution, and the final step is the test cycle closure. Now, if you want to know more about all of these different phases, you can refer to the software testing lifecycle video by Edureka. So now let's move on and see the different types of testing. So quality assurance or software testing is crucial because it identifies errors, bugs from a system at the beginning. By considering the problems in the base helps to turn improvement in the quality of product and brings confidence in it. Now by beginning means where it comes feasible and able to resolve the existing bugs. Now, functional testing and non functional testing are the two kinds of testing that are performed by the QA or the software tester. So, the types of software testing are basically the key role where the tester determines the right testing for the apps. So, here we have two main types of software testing, such as the functional testing and non functional testing. Now, under functional testing, we have unit testing, integration testing, system, interface, regression, and user acceptance testing. And under non functional testing, we have documentation, installation, performance, reliability, and security testing. Also, performance testing can be divided into load, stress, endurance, and spike testing. So now let's move ahead and have a look at all of these types of testing in details. So the functional testing focuses on manual as well as automation testing. A functional testing is a bunch of various types to execute the perfect product. Now the first one is the unit testing under functional testing. So unit testing is basically a level of software testing where individual units or components of a software are tested. Now, the purpose is to validate each unit of the software performs as designed. Now, a unit is the smallest testable part of any software. It usually has one or a few inputs and usually just a single output. Now, who performs this unit testing? It is normally performed by the software developers themselves or their peers. Now, in rare cases, it may also be performed by independent software testers. Now let's have a look at the unit testing tasks. So first we have the unit test plan, under which we prepare, review, rework, and form the baseline. Next up we have the unit test cases or scripts, where again we prepare, review, rework, and check the baseline of the scripts. And finally we have the unit test step, where we perform our final task. Now let's have a look at some of the benefits of unit testing. Now, unit testing increases confidence in changing or maintaining code. So, if good unit tests are written and if they are run every time any code is changed, we will be able to promptly catch any defects introduced due to the change. Next up, codes are more reusable. In order to make unit testing possible, codes need to be modular. Now, this means that codes are easier to reuse. Also, the development is faster. Now, if you do not have unit testing in place, you write your code and perform that fuzzy developer test. But if you have unit testing in place, you write the test, write the code, and run the test. Now, writing tests takes time, but the time is compensated by the less amount of time it takes to run the tests. You need not fire up the GUI and provide all those inputs. Now, the cost of fixing a defect detected during unit testing is lesser in comparison to that of defects detected at higher levels. So, compare the cost of a defect detected during acceptance testing or when the software is live. Next up, debugging is very easy. So, when a test fails, only the latest changes need to be debugged. So, with testing at higher levels, changes made over the span of several days or weeks or months need to be scanned. Also, codes are more reliable here. Now, moving on, the next type is the integration testing. So, integration testing is a level of software testing where individual units are combined and tested as a group. So, the purpose of this level of testing is to expose faults in the interaction between integrated units. Test drivers and test stubs are used to assist in integration testing. So, who performs integration testing? For this, the developers themselves or some independent testers perform this sort of testing. Integration testing also involves a task plan such as the integration test plan, where we prepare, review, rework, and form the baseline. Also, we have integration tests cases or scripts under which we prepare, review, rework, and form the baseline. And finally, again, we perform the integration test. Now, let's have a look at some of the approaches of integration testing. The first one is the Big Bang. Now, Big Bang is an approach to integration testing where all or most of the units are combined together and tested at one go. Now, this approach is taken when the testing team receives the entire software in a bundle. So, what is the difference between Big Bang integration testing and system testing? Well, the former tests only the interactions between the units, while the latter tests the entire system. Next up, we have the top down. Now, this is an approach to integration testing where top level units are tested first and lower level units are tested step by step after that. This approach is taken when top down development approach is followed. The test stubs are needed to simulate lower level units which may not be available during the initial phases. Next up, we have the bottom up. Now, this is an approach to integration testing where bottom level units are tested first and upper level units step by step after that. Now, this approach is taken when bottom up development approach is followed. The final one is the sandwich or the hybrid. Now, this is an approach to integration testing which is a combination of top down and bottom up approaches. Next up, we have the system testing. System testing is a level of software testing where a complete and integrated software is tested. Now, the purpose of this test is to evaluate the system's compliance with the specified requirements. System testing is the third level of software testing performed after integration testing and before the acceptance testing. So, basically, the independent testers perform the system testing. Now, again, the system testing also has certain tasks such as the system test plan, where we prepare, review, rework, and form the baseline. And next up, we have the system test cases, where we prepare, review, rework, and form the baseline as well. And then finally, perform the system test. Now, let's have a look at an analogy of system testing. Now, during the process of manufacturing a ballpoint pen, the cap, the body, the tail, the ink cartridge, and the ballpoint are produced separately and unit tested separately. So, when two or more units are ready, they are assembled and integration testing is performed. Now, when the complete pen is integrated, the system testing is performed. So, this was all about the system testing. Now, let's move on and have a look at the interface testing. Now, it basically verifies that communication between the systems are done correctly if all supported hardware or software has been tested. Now, when an application or a software or a website is developed, then there are several components of it. Those components can be server, database, etc. Now, the connection which integrates and facilitates the communication between these components is termed as an interface. So, there are three phases of interface testing in an interface lifecycle. First, we have the configuration and development. So, when the interface is configured and once the development starts, the configurations need to be verified as per the requirement. Next up is the validation. So, when the development is completed, the interface needs to be validated and verified. Now, this can be done as a part of unit testing also. Finally, we have the maintenance. Now, once the whole software is ready, deployed, and working, then the interface needs to be monitored for its performance and any new issues introduced due to the changes made or deteriorating performance. Now, let's see why do we have to perform interface testing. So, it is required to check if the server execution is proper. Now, error handling is done properly and appropriate error messages are shown for queries made by the application or software. It is also used to check the result when a connection to the server is reset, and also to check the security aspect when the components communicate within themselves. Interface testing is also done to check the impact of network failure on the communication between the components. Now, let's have a look at few steps that ensure interface testing is successful. First one is define your requirement. Now, before creating the interface tests, it is essential to understand the application. Hence, try to find answers to questions like what is the purpose of the interface or what is the workflow of the system or application. Now, defining all such answers will help you to understand the requirement. Next up is the expected output. Now, we know and understand the requirement very well. It is the time to finalize the output that we will be expecting from the tests. Not just a pass or fail, it can be some data, call to another API, etc. Third one is start small. So with interface testing, we can't directly move on with creating big test cases. Creating small test cases or calls is relatively simple. At least in small functions, create small test code and verify if the output is as expected or not. Next, try automating. Now, writing codes for testing an interface can be boring. You will not only be spending time in writing the code, but along with this, you will also have to spend time to understand the format, style, the coding language used for development, and then, as an icing on the cake, you will have to make sure that your code isn't creating a problem to the app or system code. Finally, define the start and stop points. Now, before starting the execution of a test, we always decide the start and the stop point of the test, as well as decide how the entire testing process will start and end. Next up, we have the regression testing. Now, regression testing is a crucial stage for the product and very useful for the developers to identify the stability of the product with the changing requirements. Now, let's have a look at some of the techniques of regression testing. First one is retest all. Now, as the name itself suggests, the entire test cases in the test suite are re-executed to ensure that there are no bugs that have occurred because of a change in the code. Next up, we have the regression test selection. Now, in this method, test cases are selected from the test suite to be re-executed. Not the entire suite is re-executed here. Next up, we have the test case prioritization. Test cases with high priority are executed first, then the ones with medium and low priority. Finally, we have the hybrid technique. Now, this is a combination of regression test selection and test case prioritization. Now, how do we select the regression test suite? For most of the bugs found in the production environment occur because of the changes did or bugs fixed at the 11th hour, that is, the changes done at a later stage. So let's have a look at the test plan template. First, we have the document history. Now, it consists of a record of the first draft and all the updated ones. Next, we have the references column that keeps a track of all the reference documents used or required for the project while creating a test plan. Next up, we have the regression test plan that consists of all the introduction and details that are involved in the testing. Now, the final one in functional testing is the acceptance testing. Now, acceptance testing is a level of software testing where a system is tested for acceptability. The purpose of this test is to evaluate the system's compliance with the business requirements and assess whether it is acceptable for delivery. So basically, the management, sales, or the customer support performs these kind of testing. Also, the customers and the end users of the software can do the following. Acceptance testing also has a task plan such as the acceptance test plan where we prepare, review, rework and form the baseline. And then we have the acceptance test cases or checklist where we again prepare, review, rework and form the baseline and finally perform the acceptance testing. Now let's have a look at some of the types of acceptance testing. First one is the user acceptance testing. Now this is used to assess whether the product is working for the user correctly for the usage. Next up, we have the business acceptance testing. Now, this is required to assess whether the product meets the business goals and purposes or not. Next, we have the contract acceptance testing. Now, this is a contract which specifies that once the product goes live, within a predetermined period, the acceptance test must be performed and it should pass all the acceptance use cases. Then we have the operational acceptance testing. Now, this is to assess the operational readiness of the product and is a non-functional testing. It mainly includes testing of recovery, compatibility, maintainability, technical support availability, reliability, failover, localization, etc. Then we have the alpha testing. Now, this is to assess the product in the development or testing environment by a specialized testers team, usually called the alpha testers. And finally, we have the beta testing. Now, this is to assess the product by exposing it to the real end users, usually called the beta testers or beta users in their environment. Now, these were some of the functional testing. Now, let's move on and have a look at some of the non-functional testing types. Now, there are a bunch of software testing types which differentiate the job work for the QA while testing the apps. It is a testing to determine the performance of the system to measure, validate, or verify quality attribute of the system. The first one is the documentation testing. Now, documentation testing helps to estimate testing efforts required and test coverage. Now, software documentation includes test plan, test cases, and requirements section. So, there are four main focus areas when testing documentation. That is, instructions, examples, messages, and samples. So, if specific instructions are provided for certain activities, it's likely we will have test scenarios defined for those same activities. Similarly, step-by-step examples may be provided to explain GUI screen inputs, clarify syntax for commands or other interfaces, show expected outputs, or illustrate other important points. Now, when we hit a problem, for example, an error message, we should verify that the documentation for the message is correct. Now, finally, samples are sometimes documented for such things as initialization or tuning parameter input files. Now, next up, we have the installation testing. So, installation testing is a type of quality assurance work in the software industry that converges on what customers will need to do to install and set up the new software successfully. Now, the testing process may involve full, partial, or upgrades install or uninstall processes. Now, let's have a look at some of the installation testing tips. First, we need to install the full version of application. Now, in case if you are upgrading the application or previously installed a basic version, now installing the full version on same path, then system should allow you to install full version application without any error. Next, we have the automate testing efforts. Now, the flow chart will help you to create the automated scripts. Using the flow chart, you can easily make out the automated script for installation testing. Now, after execution, every test case use of the disk image to be installing on dedicated machine, which will save some time. Next up, we have the required disk space check in installation. Now, this is the most critical scenario in the installation testing. Now, the disk space checking is done using automated and manual testing method. So you can verify calculated disk space by installer is correct or not by using manually or automated tools. Now, on different file system format, the disk space may vary, like on NTFS, FAT32, and FAT16, etc. Next, we have the use of distributed testing environment. Now, to executing test cases effectively, you can use distributed testing environment, which will save your cost and time. Next, we have the automate the check of files installed after installation. So you can use the automated script to check that all the required files are installed successfully or not. Then we have the confirm for registry changes after installation. So here you have to check for registry changes after the installation of your software. Then we have the negative testing and installation testing. Now this intensely tried to break the installation process to check the behavior of application under such conditions. Finally, we have the uninstallation testing. Now, you should also check for the uninstall testing to check whether the user is able to uninstall the application without any error and removing all folders and files related to installation. Next up, we have the performance testing. Now, the performance testing includes load testing, stress, endurance, and spike testing. Now, here the software tester team provides performance testing on amazing projects. Now, let's have a look at the types of performance testing. So, we have load testing, which is a type of performance testing conducted to evaluate the behavior of a system at increasing workload. Then we have the stress testing, which is a type of performance testing conducted to evaluate the behavior of a system at or beyond the limits of its anticipated workload. Then we have the endurance testing, which is a type of performance testing conducted to evaluate the behavior of a system when a significant workload is given continuously. Finally, we have the spike testing, which is a type of performance testing conducted to evaluate the behavior of a system when the load is suddenly and substantially increased. Now, let's have a look at some of the tips for performance testing. So first, we have to establish a test environment as close to the production environment as possible. Then we have to isolate the test environment even from the QA or UAT environment. Though there is no perfect tool for performance testing, research and decide on the tool that best fits your purpose. Also, do not rely on the results of just one test. You should conduct multiple tests to arrive at an average number. Be wary of any changes to the test environment from one test to the other. Next up, we have the reliability testing. Now, reliability testing assures that the product is fault-free and is reliable for its intended purpose. It is about exercising an application so that failures are discovered before the system deployed. Now, let's have a look at some of the types of reliability testing. First, we have the feature test. Now, in this, each function in the software should be executed at least once, and the interaction between two or more functions should be reduced. Also, each function should undergo proper execution or functional test. Next, we have the regression test. So whenever any new functionality is added or old functionalities are removed in an application, it undergoes a regression test to make sure with introduction of new functionality, no new bugs are introduced. Then we have the load test. Now load test is done to test whether the application is supporting the required load without getting breakdown. Now in order to find the breakpoint of an application, the load is gradually increased until the application gets hung. Now let's have a look at some of the importance of reliability testing. As we know, software applications are in use in almost every sector of manufacturing, healthcare, defense, government, telecommunication, etc. Therefore, the question is that how reliable the software application is. This question is very important because the reliable software is of great use and the organization working on it can feel the confidence in their business systems. Now, the test cases should be designed covering all the required functionality of the software application, and these test cases should be executed for sufficient amount of time to get a rough estimate of how long the software can execute fine without failure. Now, the test case execution sequence to run the overall functionality of the software application should match the real production operational plan of the application. Now, moving on, let's have a look at the final type of non-functional testing. The next type is the security testing. Now, the security word itself defines that something has to relate with technique to strengthen the security. It's not about securing data and information. It can affect the whole functionality of the system. So, there are basically four main focus areas that are to be considered in security testing. That is the network security, which involves looking for vulnerabilities in the network infrastructure. Then we have client security, which ensures that the client cannot be manipulated and the server code and its technologies are robust enough to fend off any intrusion. Now let's have a look at some of the security testing techniques. First one is access to application. So whether it is a desktop application or a website, access security is implemented by roles and rights management. It is often done implicitly while covering functionality. Then we have the data protection. Now there are three aspects of data security. First one is that a user can view or utilize only the data which he is supposed to use. The second aspect of data protection is related to how that data is stored in the database. And the last one is an extension of the second aspect. Proper security measures must be adopted when the flow of sensitive or business critical data occurs. Next up, we have the brute force attack. Now, the brute force attack is mostly done by some software tools. The concept is that by using a valid user ID, the software attempts to guess the associated password by trying to log in again and again. Then we have the SQL injection and XSS. So conceptually speaking, the theme of both these hacking attempts is similar. So for all input fields of the website, field length should be defined small enough to restrict input of any script. Then we have the service access points. So when there is a large number of the target audience, the access points should be open enough to facilitate all users, accommodating enough to fulfill all users' requests, and secure enough to cope with any security trial. Next up, we have the session management. So you can test for session expiry after particular idle time, session termination after maximum lifetime, session termination after logout, check for session cookie scope, etc. Then we have the error handling. So the error codes are returned with a detailed message. These messages should not contain any critical information that can be used for hacking purpose. Finally, we have the specific risky functionalities. Now, mainly the two risky functionalities are payments and file uploads. These functionalities should be tested very well. So these were the different types of software testing that are involved in our everyday life. To stay updated on more such topics, do subscribe our channel. And don't forget to let us know about your opinion in the comment section below. Till then, thank you and happy learning.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!